So the topic today is how you as a medical device manufacturer can leverage an ISAO to improve your compliance with FDA cybersecurity guidance and overall become a more secure organization. Pleasure to have with us today Nastassia Tamari and Jessica Wilkerson, both from FDA. They will join us shortly for the fireside chat, and I myself, I'm Axel Worth, Chief Security Strategist here at MedCrypt, and also supporting MedISAO, so I'm here in a little bit of a dual role. And the agenda today, a couple of slides up front to give you a background on ISACs and ISAOs, excuse me, where they came from, their purpose, how they've developed over time, then talk a little bit about the importance of an ISAO and what FDA has recommended with regards to device manufacturers' membership in ISAOs, talk about a few best practices, but hopefully we can actually roll all of that up in 20 minutes and then with Jessica and Nastassia have a fireside chat, which again, we encourage everybody to also provide your questions. We can then discuss at the end. So really going back to the 90s, as they say, the concept of an ISAC really goes back to the Presidential Directive 63 from 1998, which basically established the concept of sector-specific organizations that for the critical infrastructure industries allow the sharing and cooperation around cybersecurity, right? Until then, the problem was really that there were certain legal and antitrust barriers that competing companies couldn't cooperate, right? And of course, that puts us as the cyber defenders as at an advantage because cyber adversaries, we know very well, collaborate all the time. So it was recognized and therefore in this presidential directive established that even though competing banks, competing energy companies, other competing commercial entities should really not competing on cybersecurity because that would be to everybody's disadvantage. And so back in 98, the concept of an ISAC was born, basically an organization that is specific to one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors and that helps with threat intelligence, security best practices, development of risk mitigation, incident response, threat warnings, basically maintain sector-wide situational awareness through sharing activities, but also workshops, webinars, technical exchanges, and so forth. So basically take the competitive and legal problems out of cybersecurity cooperation to everybody's benefit. Moving forward a couple of years in the Executive Order 13691 in 2015, then the concept of an ISAC was expanded to include also a new construct called Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, short ISAO. The formation of ISAOs is supported by the Department of Homeland Security to basically help with additional communication within specific areas of interest. So the ISACs were specific and dedicated to the 16 critical infrastructures. And it was recognized over time that that was a little bit too narrow and too specific of a construct. And therefore, the more flexible concept of an ISAO was born, which allows then for broader and community-driven groups to address very specific cybersecurity problems within a given sector or community of interest. They can serve a broader range of sectors, for example, small businesses or legal or accounting, or they can serve specific subsectors. And we have in healthcare, the specific example, we have the Health ISAC, which is really infrastructure-specific ISAC that covers the entire healthcare and public health sector, including payers, healthcare providers, pharma, software suppliers, vendors, manufacturers, and so forth. But then at the same time, you also have MedISAO, which is the organization that is hosting this webinar. MedISAO being then focused on specifically the medical device manufacturer community within the larger healthcare sector. And we also, don't see, for example, HISAC and MedISAO as competing organizations. We see each other as complementary, and we actually have collaborated on a number of projects in the past and will continue to do so in the future. Now, there are many different ISACs and ISAOs, and if you look at this picture here, some of the logos I downloaded, you clearly see that what I explained earlier, the difference between ISAC and ISAO, well, if you look at the actual naming, it isn't quite carried forward, right? You have a real estate ISAC. I wouldn't necessarily consider real estate as one of the 16 critical infrastructure industries. There's a maritime ISAC, which again, is not necessarily, at least not by itself, a critical infrastructure. It is part of the larger transportation critical infrastructure. So again, there was a logic behind differentiating ISACs and ISAOs. That logic is not necessarily carried forward as individual organizations name themselves, but the range is broad. They can be regional, they can be industry, sector specific, and yes, there's even a space ISAC that covers all the things that happen in outer space and connect us to space. There are many governing organizations, including the National Council of ISACs, IACI as a global organization. There's also an ISAO standards organization, and all of those organizations are trying to keep the world of evolving and new ISACs and ISAOs, keep that organized and under control. And as of recently, we've also seen similar concept develop in Europe. So the overall ISAC ISAO concept is no longer just a US-centric model. We see adoption also in other countries and regions now. And we'd already talked about the different focal points. They can be by sector, infrastructure, certain industries, or by geography. You see the example here. There's the Arizona cyber warfare range. There's cyber Hawaii. So quite diverse. They can be by interest, small business, and there's also a number of, let's say, associated organizations that are not necessarily an ISAC ISAO by themselves, but they're tightly related. Things like InfraGard under the FBI and Cyber Labs and other organizations. So again, a fairly broad background here. So what's then the purpose of an ISAO and why are they actually important to us, right? They're basically, as I said earlier, formed to support cybersecurity collaboration and share critical information on cybersecurity risks. Facilitate the collection, analysis, and sharing of cybersecurity threat information, support the proactive response to cybersecurity risks, including discovery and management of new vulnerabilities. That can be industry specific, for example, healthcare. They can be regional, they can be national. But overall, the role is to enhance the security posture of our critical infrastructure industries and many other industries with the goal to overall improve the security posture of the nation. Specifically now, switching over to where the FDA comes in, we have currently the two guiding documents from the FDA, the 2023 pre-market cybersecurity guidance and the 2016 post-market cybersecurity guidance. Both do reference the role and importance of ISAOs. Specifically, FDA encouraged device manufacturers to actively participate in information sharing organizations to strengthen their post-market posture and obviously also produce more secure products in the end. There are certain risks in non-participation. For example, your awareness of threats may be delayed. Your communication about newly discovered vulnerabilities may be delayed. That may result in compliance challenges. So as a benefit, aligning with FDA's expectations around ISACs and ISAOs certainly enhances your cyber preparedness and including preparedness for regulatory audits. Obviously, the connection between the pre and post-market guidance is that the pre-market guidance clearly states that a plan to monitor, identify, and address post-market cybersecurity vulnerabilities is required for the submission of your device for market approval. So there is no market approval without laying out to the FDA what your plan is for post-market management, which is not limited to, but should probably include considerations with regards to active participation in an ISAO. So overall, not participating in an ISAO may increase your risk of being caught up in cybersecurity shortcomings, may delay market entry of new devices and other regulatory consequences. So there is also within the FDA's regulatory framework the concept of enforcement discretion. This concept is not limited to cybersecurity, but there are a couple of areas where it actually plays into cybersecurity. So, for example, around patching, right? It is clearly in the interest of patient safety to maintain a device's cybersecurity posture once it is deployed, is released to the market. And therefore, FDA is very interested that patches are deployed timely and are communicated timely to mitigate any emerging threats that may exploit any vulnerabilities in your devices. And therefore, right now, because of that enforcement discretion concept, FDA has stated that updating software that address non-critical vulnerabilities and that do not alter the device's intended use or function do not require a renewed 510K submission, as an example here. So clearly, that is all in the interest of improving the availability and the deployment of patches and the closing of vulnerabilities. So clearly, the expectation is that manufacturers have a robust post-market monitoring system in place that monitors evolving threats, new vulnerabilities, new risks, and communicate then accordingly with their customer base, and also that you as a manufacturer maintain processes for timely vulnerability communication and deployment of remediation, making patches, updates, changes available to your customer base. ISAOs can facilitate real-time cybersecurity information sharing, and they can guide members in understanding areas where you may have questions around enforcement discretion, for example. So if we look at specifically the FDA post-market guidance from December 2016, the concept of ISAO is mentioned multiple times throughout the document, specifically because it is a critical component for a medical device manufacturer to demonstrate a comprehensive approach to management of post-market cybersecurity activities, respond to threats, manage vulnerabilities, and so forth. And that companies that are actively participating in such a program, such a program meaning an ISAO, are subject to and can benefit from certain enforcement discretion and exceptions, as we discussed in the previous slide. So, for example, and specifically, and I encourage everybody to look at the post-market guidance section here I'm calling out, because I'm only summarizing. Obviously, the actual language is much more detailed and specific, but typically FDA would require reporting of an uncontrolled risk under 21 CFR Part 803 or 806 or 1004, and expects manufacturers then to reduce the risk to an acceptable level, identify and implement mitigations and compensating controls, and provide relevant information on the recommended controls to your customer and user base. However, it is also stated in the post-market guidance that the FDA does not intend to enforce reporting under Part 806, meaning correction and removal of devices, if there's no known serious adverse event or death associated with a newly discovered vulnerability. It is communicated to customers and users within 30 days. Manufacturers fix it within 60 days, and a manufacturer is an active participant and a member of an ISAO that helps with the sharing of vulnerabilities and facilitates communication and so forth. So again, I encourage everybody to specifically look at the sections in the post-market guidance that discuss the benefits of participating in an ISAO. Of course, it is not as simple as just being a member of an ISAO, but again, pointing back at the actual guidance document here. So maximizing your benefit, your impact from participating in ISAO, certainly, engage, actively participate with your peers in discussion, threat sharing, security best practices, integrate ISAO insights into your cybersecurity risk management framework, produce metrics that measure things like, for example, your threat response time, your vulnerability disclosure times, and so forth, as well as then through a partnership model, collaborate with ISAOs across the sector and even with other manufacturers, because as I said initially, if one manufacturer has a cybersecurity problem that impacts their devices, all manufacturers suffer. So this is really not a competitive kind of situation. That is really to the benefit of the larger healthcare industry. So summarizing here, ISAOs are critical for the medical device industry to build partnerships and to align with expected post-market practices as laid out in the post-market guidance. Share learnings and your findings through the ISAO and the ISAO community with other manufacturers, and strengthen your collective security posture through sharing of that knowledge. So with that, and earlier actually when we did the test run, both Natasha and Jessica had problems with their video. So for the fireside chat, unfortunately, we probably have to do with pictures and audio here. But I picked out a couple of topics I wanted to discuss. And I'm going to go here now out of full screen mode so I can see if there's anything already in the QA or chat.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions in the Q&A I think that we can kind of answer in one big swoop. So I think the simplest way to answer a lot of the questions that are coming up is that ISAO is an umbrella term, and then organizations who fulfill that role can be an ISAO. So Health ISAC is technically an ISAO. Med ISAO is an ISAO. And so when you think about it, there are different ISAOs that are targeted to different specialities or different considerations, if you want to think of it like that. Health ISAC is very, very broad in terms of having several different subsectors included underneath it. So healthcare delivery, medical device manufacturing concerns. It has some broader medical product manufacturing in there as well. And so it provides a very broad perspective, but in some circumstances may not provide as much focus on individual areas or individual topics as people may desire. So there are other ISAOs that organizations may want to look at that may be focused on medical device cybersecurity alone or healthcare delivery cybersecurity alone. for example, there's a bio-ISAC as well that focuses on biological cybersecurity. And so they enable the conversations and the work to be a little bit more focused. And this is also an area where you can think of that it could be an organizational benefit to figure out whether or not membership in multiple ISACs or ISAOs may be useful. You know, you could have a health ISAC for that very broad overview, and then maybe another more focused ISAO for some of those more specific needs. So it really depends on the organization's needs, and organizations are certainly encouraged to look at the different ISAOs that are available and see which one might help them manage their cybersecurity programs in the way that they want to. Let me look at the questions, make sure we answered all of them.
And I did touch on that earlier, but thank you, Jessica, for taking it, you know, a little more detail here. But within the healthcare industry, we have HISAC as well as MedISAO. MedISAO is a much smaller organization, is very focused on medical device manufacturers, is also aiming to help smaller manufacturers that don't have all the resources, personnel and financial, as the large manufacturers have. So I personally, as you know, operating MedISAO, don't see us as a competitor to HISAC. I see us as, you know, complementary pieces that may you know, work for one organization, may work for another, and there are actually a few companies that are a member of both.
Right. So if there are, I think we may have answered all of them. Maybe the last one is, there was one on how do I find out which ISAO I should participate in as a manufacturer. Probably will require doing a little bit of a, I'm tempted to call it a beauty pageant, but just, you know, talking to health ISAC, talking to the different ISAOs and seeing what their service offerings are, what kind of benefits members get, and so on, and then just looking at your organizational needs and seeing which one seems to match up, which one or which ones seems to match up best. But I think from that case, actually, we might be good to move into the chat.
Yep. Okay. Appreciate it. And again, you know, keep adding questions, please, at any time. We can pick those up. Yeah. So I mean, I you picked up a list of topics here I wanted to go over in a you know, interactive discussion here. You know, one is obviously we are now about a year and a half past the Section 524B of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, which provided quite some changes on cybersecurity for medical devices, but also directionally it changed the FDA's mandate on medical device cybersecurity, and we are a little over a year past the final FDA pre-market guidance from September 2023. So, question for both of you, Natasha and Jessica, you know, what have you seen as being the impact of 524B, certainly on you as the regulator, but also how have you seen medical device manufacturers respond, and how has that impacted, let's say, the cybersecurity evidence you see as part of, you know, market approval submissions?
Sure. So I'll start, and then Nastassia can certainly join in. So I think one thing that we do go to great pains to clarify is that we actually don't believe that 524B changed our mandate at all. We think that what Section 524B did is give us additional teeth. So everything that is in 524B, everything that is in the pre-market guidance that was finalized in 2023, that has been the same really for over a decade and really longer than that. The difference is there was more, let's say, room for discussion between manufacturers and the FDA about whether or not a cybersecurity risk represented a safety risk, and if with the safety risk, whether or not it was a sufficiently high safety risk that the cybersecurity risk needed to be addressed, or how the cybersecurity risk would need to be addressed. And that would sometimes become a very long discussion between medical device manufacturers and the FDA. And with 524B, which we think is a very positive development considering how fast cyber threats move and can result in exploitation, we don't really have to have those conversations anymore, because now the standard that gets set is a reasonable assurance of cybersecurity. So it just simplifies the conversation. We think that that's very helpful. And that leads into what we see with the reviews, which we think are generally going very well. And this is in large part due to the fact that we have been doing what we've been doing for over a decade, and that this wasn't really a massive sea change when 524B passed, because what it meant is that the manufacturers were prepared. They already knew what we expected. They already had experience with what we expected. And therefore, what changed is that the requirements went from being a regulatory requirement to being a statutory requirement. And while it certainly changes the conversation in some important ways in terms of enforcement and regulatory powers and so on like that, it didn't actually really practically change that much. So manufacturers are free to disagree with that take. But in terms of what we're seeing in the submissions, there are still some issues that we're experiencing, and we would put this down, I think, to some degree to continued efforts to mature in the sector, but certainly software bill of materials, so software transparency continues to be a challenge, just because it's very technical and very finicky, and so getting the details right on an SBOM can be complicated. So we see quite a few deficiencies or issues in submissions around SBOM. We also see it around testing, and specifically penetration testing. So penetration testing, there's not that many penetration testing experts out there, especially experts who specialize in medical device cybersecurity penetration testing. And so there's a little bit of a crunch for manufacturers to find penetration testers on a timeline that would be appropriate. We also see issues with penetration testing scopes too narrowly. So they're not covering the device and the related systems, they're only covering a part. And so in those cases, we typically will send that back to the manufacturer to say, this may not be sufficient, and then tell them why and what we recommend they do instead. But Nastassia, I think I'd turn this over to you to add whatever you think would be helpful.
Yeah, no, and I agree with everything that Jessica has just said, obviously. But one thing I do want to call out that I think is really great with 524B and post-market is that the goal is to make sure that we're able to have a cybersecurity management plan, and we're looking at managing risk, not just right within like the pre-market phase, but setting us up for post-market as well. And so I think that's really critical. All of the requirements and recommendations within 524B and the pre-market really go to have a more robust cybersecurity program, right? So these activities are not necessarily one and done. We're looking for manufacturers to then have that total product lifecycle approach that kind of bleeds into post-market. And so all of these activities really help towards doing that and making sure that, you have medical devices that are safe, effective, cyber secure for long term, because we know that, right, like legacy is a challenge, and having the statute and the pre-market really do help strengthen that for post-market.
Good. Thank you. So that kind of leads to my next topic here. And, so what's going to happen over the next 1 or 2 years? What can the industry expect from FDA going forward with regards to certainly guidances, but also other activities that may be related to that?
Yeah, I think you'll continue to see FDA doing the things that that we do. Obviously, I know we have pre-market on the A list for FY25, so that's going to be something that we will be focused on. And so, just as a reminder for this group, we released a select update in March of this year, which is FDA's interpretation of those 524B authorities. And the intent of that is to roll up into the pre-market guidance. And so the pre-market guidance will have that 524B interpretation. And that is expected to be released towards the back half of the fiscal year. Since it is on our A-list guidance, I think you'll continue to see us making sure that we are contracting out with organizations or partnering with organizations to help provide resources that speak to some of the requirements around pre-market, and just to really better help manufacturers have some of those best practices. And then really also focusing on SBOM. We know SBOM is a challenge for manufacturers, and we get it, right? It's actually also a challenge not just for medical device manufacturers, I think across multiple industries, but that's one of the things that we are looking to mature, at least internally within FDA, our internal capabilities around SBOM. So really just being able to have more robustness and understanding of SBOMs that are submitted. So manufacturers, right, maybe getting questions, more detailed questions around some of those SBOMs that are submitted around completeness and other items. So that's really, I think, what we're working towards, at least for the immediate year, and then, looking at really helping to support manufacturers with any resources.
And actually, I think maybe we'll pause here, certainly going through the chat one. So there's two questions in the Q&A going back to ISAO membership that I think are important to touch on. So there's one question essentially around, could there be a challenge, or is there a challenge with ISAOs with a very broad mandate or very broad membership where it can become difficult because, for example, medical device manufacturers may have their customers in the room? This is from the question itself. And is there possibly an opportunity to have some of those more focused ISAOs where some of those other challenges may not be as present? And the answer is yes, there could certainly be yes, and I think that's why additional medical device-focused ISAOs have been established. So the two that I can think of right now is MedISAO, the one that MedCrypt is associated with, and then the other one is CloudWave. They were previously known as Sensato, but they both focus pretty heavily on device cybersecurity. And so it really just, again, it depends on the organizational needs in terms of which ISAC or ISAO may be the best for an organization to be part of. And I actually will just throw a pointer out that the Health Sector Coordinating Council does have a free resource available called the HICMISO, HICMISO, which is a matrix and a comparison of the different healthcare information sharing groups out there. So if you are in the position of trying to figure out which ISAOs or other groups exist and which ones may focus on which topics, that resource may be a very good place to start. And if I can do it, at some point I will try to grab the link to that resource and get that into the chat. The second question that had come in was around the fact that ISAO membership can be very costly, and especially if there are different ISAOs that an organization wants to join, it may be that that yearly cost starts to add up very quickly. And the point was raised that perhaps this would make it so that membership in ISAO should not be mandatory given that resource spend. So I did want to clarify. ISAO membership is not mandatory. There is no statutory or regulatory requirement that says a medical device manufacturer must be a member of an ISAO. What the post-market guidance does say is that if you want to qualify for the post-market enforcement discretion, so if you would want to take advantage of an opportunity of having some kind of cybersecurity issue that otherwise would require regulatory reporting to the FDA to disclose that issue and make it and get it fixed, essentially a recall. If it would otherwise be a recall, and you want to qualify for that enforcement discretion, then ISAO membership is a requirement. So if you're not a member of an ISAO, then that's fine. There's no mandatory requirement to be a member of an ISAO, but you won't qualify for that post-market enforcement discretion. So it really is, again, it's up to the organization and the benefits that the organization sees or does not see in membership. To some of the points that Axel raised earlier, we do think it's incredibly important that medical device manufacturers are getting cyber threat information from somewhere, and that somewhere should be a reliable, trustworthy source. And generally speaking, that is the role that ISAOs fill, is they are a trustworthy, centralized source of reliable and timely cyber threat information. But again, depending on the organization's need, depending on the resources that the organization has available, they may or may not want to spend those resources.
Great, thank you. And again, any other questions, please feel free to use the Q&A and we'll pick them up as we go. So moving on to the next topic, we already talked about what FDA has seen over the last year and a half in pre-market activities in manufacturer submissions and what has been changing, what is still missing. So now let's look at the same question from the post-market perspective, right? Over the last couple of years, we have seen a number of security advisories that certainly had impact on the medical device industry, be it Log4Shell, be it the various Bluetooth vulnerabilities we've come across, and so forth. So is there anything from the FDA perspective where you say this is something the industry should be aware of, this is something the industry should be doing better, so forth? So overall, again, over the last 1, 2, 3 years, whatever has happened in the post-market, are things going well? Should things be improving, and where should they be improving?
Yeah, I think maybe I can start, and Jessica, if you want to take this after. I think, right, what we're seeing, and we're having a lot of these conversations internally, right, especially as we know that the post-market guidance is getting, right, I think it's like 8 or 9 years old now. And so we're having a lot of these conversations around what are some good lessons learned, what have we seen that we really do appreciate that the industry is doing, and where can we further improve. And I think this is maybe a conversation we've actually had with a lot of industry members just around vulnerability disclosures in general. I think if you look back 10 years ago, there were a lot of conversations where coordinated vulnerability disclosure wasn't as common as it is today, right? There was a lot of concern from manufacturers when they did receive some coordinated vulnerability disclosure from a security researcher, and having some apprehension of disclosing that. And I think today we've really seen a lot of maturity around that from our manufacturers. And I think that goes back to speak to, right, like the total product life cycle, and how we're not just releasing a product, and then going on to the next one, right? We're really focusing on cyber across that. I think we still there's still a lot of opportunities around releasing some of those vulnerability disclosures. I know HSCC has actually a working group, which I believe is co-led by Jessica, dedicated to vulnerability communication and how best to talk to patients and how best to talk to health IT folks around that. And so I think there's opportunity there where we can definitely put some of those terms in more clear guidance, or like more clear speak, I guess is a poor way to put it. Right, but just making sure, right, that it's easy to understand for an average layperson. You don't need a PhD in cybersecurity to figure out what's going on. So there's that piece which I'll let Jessica speak to. And then the other piece that we have been talking about is just around vulnerability disclosures that perhaps get a little bit stale. So initially, right, we have some of those manufacturers doing the right thing and disclosing vulnerability either on their website or to customers through ISAOs with CISA directly, and saying, hey, you know, this is the plan and this is what we're doing. But there's that last piece of follow-up to say, hey, did we do this, right? If the plan is, hey, we're going to update this and update a patch in Q1 of FY25, are we then going back and saying to that same disclosure to update it to say, hey, yep, we did this and it's complete. If you haven't received what you need to, please reach out to, you know, whoever that is. So I think that's what we're seeing across industry is sometimes we have those vulnerability disclosures that go a little bit stale. And that's one thing that, right, I think we just have to make sure that we do go back and we update some of those. But, you know, those are just, I think, maybe a few of the highlights. Jessica, I don't know, since you are the co-lead of that working group, want to mention anything there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot in vulnerability communications and advisories that can continue maturing. Certainly, I think that, you know, there's the issue of how many advisories are coming out, this idea that having to do manual ingestion and analysis in response to advisories is not useful, so needing to get to an ability to have automated advisories, things that are both comprehensible by human beings, because there are certain advisories that will need to be reviewed by humans, but that in some way, shape, or form, the advisories are also ingestible in an automated fashion, because otherwise, just the scale and frequency, we're not going to be able to keep up. I think the other thing too, and Nastassia, apologies if you had gone over this, is just looking at making sure that the advisories actually contain all of the information that a reader might need and that it's useful. So we've been having increasing conversations with manufacturers providing feedback on their advisories, where if they're not telling their customers what they're actually doing to remediate the issue, then we're trying to encourage them to add that and trying to encourage them to add timelines. We've certainly had some of those conversations about things like the known exploited vulnerability list, and making sure that if a vulnerability that had previously not been known to be exploited becomes known to be exploited, that advisory is updated so that customers have that information to help them prioritize their own risk management. So there's a lot of different aspects of it, and I think it's going to continue to be informed by our experience in terms of what we would like to see in the interactive conversations we're continuing to have with manufacturers about their advisories. But maybe what I will just say as a sort of a finishing thought is manufacturers, you should probably expect to have more interactive conversations with us in the future on your advisories, where before it may have been more of a, you know, giving it to us for awareness. I can tell you, for better or worse, we are reading them very, very, very carefully. So take that in whatever way you think you should.
Great, thank you. One other topic I wanted to open up here, and that goes actually back from a webinar I attended where both of you also were presenting, and you had a very interesting discussion about patient harm and how to correctly think about the impact of patient harm, scenarios that can lead to patient harm, and what does that mean for your security risk assessment as part of your overall risk management processes.
Sure, and actually interrupts me if it turns out I start taking this in a different way than what you were asking me to answer. But I think as we've continued to, as not even just FDA, as the sector has continued to evolve, the ways in which cyber threats can result in patient harm related to medical devices has changed, and that's to be completely expected because the sector is changing. We are growing ever more interconnected. We're integrating new and more complex technologies into the healthcare environment, and all of that comes with increased and more complex cyber risk. And so in the past, where there was definitely a very, very heavy focus on direct device harm. So can I access this device as an unauthorized actor and manipulate it to deliver too much of a therapy to a patient, or too little of a therapy, or something that involves the device itself that could lead to that direct patient harm. We've expanded this based on our experience, and I really want to underline that this is based on our experience. This is not based on hypotheticals. To indirect patient harm, where the incident I'm thinking of, we had a medical device manufacturer experience a ransomware incident on their enterprise network, but remediation required removing access to a customer-facing cloud. And when the access to the customer-facing cloud was removed, there were dozens of devices across the country that simultaneously were not able to function as intended. So we also pay attention to that indirect device harm. And we also pay attention to manufacturing disruptions, so supply chain disruptions. It may be that some kind of cyber incident occurs and it doesn't affect devices directly, but it does affect the ability to manufacture medical devices. And that can have very significant impacts on supply chain and shortages and things like that. And then finally, there is one thing that we do want to clarify, because this was always a thing, but it's become more and more important as healthcare environments have become more connected and complicated, is a medical device itself, it can be a source of patient risk to any number of patients at one time if that device itself is exploited. There's also the possibility that the device can be a security weakness. It can be the weak link in the chain for the broader environment in which it is operating, and that the device, either because somebody uses it to move laterally or whatever the case may be, the device actually serves as a cause of a larger incident or risk for the healthcare environment itself, that the thing that it is operating in. And it's the simplest way to think that I can think to explain this is, if a threat actor uses a medical device to get access to the broader hospital network and then exploits the hospital network to deploy ransomware, now you have affected hundreds, possibly, of patients, because that hospital network is not going to be functional while the issue is remediated. So that is still patient risk. So medical device manufacturers need to be designing their devices such that they cannot be used as those entry points, those lateral movement points to exploit the larger network in which they're operating. So it's all of these things that we want to make sure folks are thinking about when they're thinking about patient harm, because it's a multifaceted issue, and all of these different facets can lead to patient safety considerations.
Maybe just to add a little bit to what Jessica had mentioned in her example with that cloud, with the manufacturer who had a ransomware event based in the cloud, that manufacturer actually had part of what was in the cloud was dosage for a medical device that gave radiation treatment therapy. And so to Jessica's point earlier, this is not just hypothetical, right? These are actual incidents that we have seen. So when you sever that connection between the cloud and the customer-facing site, right, a hospital delivery organization, you now have patients that can't get their radiation treatment. That's cancer patients, right, who aren't able to get the therapy that they need. And so in this particular instance, right, that was an impact of either a couple days or 2.5 weeks. And so when we talk about patient safety, right, these are actual incidents that we see on a routine basis. And so that's why you'll continuously hear us tie back cybersecurity to patient safety, right? Because of a cyber incident in that instance, there was a patient safety and patient outcomes, right? If you're not getting radiation treatment therapy for 2.5 weeks, what does that do to the outcome of that treatment? And so really when we talk about risk, we really look at it from that patient safety angle because we see it from the patient safety angle, right? Those are active incidents that we are supporting to make sure that the manufacturer, right, can do what they need to do to be able to further support patients. So when we do talk about risk, that's really in the way that you'll see us address that, simply because we do see the day-to-day of the patient safety risk.
Great. Yep, that was exactly my intent with that question. Appreciate your thorough discussion there. And that is actually very much in line with what has been published, right? We, to this day, are not aware of a published case of direct patient harm through a medical device, right? That is through a cyber incident, sorry, on a medical device. That is still an unknown. We know through research that is possible. Kevin Fu, Jay Radcliffe, and many others have shown that. However, we do have several studies that indicate an increase in mortality rate during an ongoing ransomware attack, for example, that show an increase in mortality rate not only at that hospital that is experiencing the attack, but also other hospitals in the region, right, that take on the additional patient load, which then leads to minor delays, which then leads to a minor increase in mortality rate. And we also know from some studies that increase in some cases even prevails over time, even 1 to 2 years after the incident, because of additional security measures, because of complications, different processes that may have improved cybersecurity, but may have then minimally, but nevertheless measurably impacted care delivery, resulting then in indirect harm.
Well, and also, that's a good point. I think we would actually disagree that we haven't seen direct patient harm. Those were the examples that Nastassia and I were referring to, where delay of care is patient harm. And we have seen in the case that I mentioned about the cloud connectivity being severed, there was delay, significant delay, days long to longer in patient ability to get radiation treatment, which, for cancer diagnoses and so on, like that can be the difference between your recovery and your not recovery. And, we've seen these other instances as well. So I do think we want to be very careful not to suggest that we haven't seen direct patient harm because of cyber incidents, because we very, very much have. I think it is more subtle in that, certainly, looking at, I hate this example, but to bring it up because it is vivid. The Homeland example of hacking somebody's pacemaker and killing the vice president, have we seen something like that? No, but I will also say one thing that we do like to remind everyone, including the medical device industry, is that medical devices are not being designed to do evidence capture. So there are a lot of medical devices that even if they were exploited in some way, there would be no way to tell. And we don't know if people are checking for that. Are clinicians, or God forbid, coroners looking for evidence of, a medical device cyber exploitation as a cause of death or harm. So, not to sound dramatic, we just like to be very careful about this, because we do run into sometimes people who say, oh, we've never seen this happen. Why are we having to do so much of this cybersecurity in medical devices? And this is why. But I know we only have a limited amount of time left, so I just wanted to quickly hit some of the questions that had come into the chat. So one of them was on a piece in the post-market guidance about ISAOs having documented policies and procedures relating to different business requirements. And essentially it's just, is this ISAO a real organization? Is it a real organization that has established policies and procedures that it will follow, that it will hold to, that it will hold its memberships to? Because, right, a group of people who agree to share information amongst each other is not an ISAO. And so it's just, is the ISAO recognized? Are they officially established? Do they have those kinds of policies and procedures? And then something came in on looking at medical devices as an entry point for HDO ransomware. Do we have any guidance for how to effectively portray multi-patient harm view and architecture views, given that MDMs have incomplete information? It's kind of a best guess based on what the manufacturer understands. So certainly we do recognize that there are going to be parts of the network that the MDM is just not going to be able to understand, or there's just going to be too much variation from one HDO to the next. But for the parts that the manufacturer understands and controls, that is the part that should certainly be very crisp. And then certainly, best guess, best educated guess for the remainder. And I think that's it for the questions. So thanks, everybody.
Great. So yeah, thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Nastassia, for being with us today. There was one question about the recording being available and the slides, and yes, it will become available. Yeah, with that, we are at the top of the hour, but certainly feel free to reach out to us if there are any additional questions. And again, both of you, thanks a lot for participating, and thanks a lot for the insightful discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks all.